Okay, my name's Sam Worthington from Interaction. Welcome to this Feed the Future Week 2020. If you first, a few moments of housekeeping. So this session will be mainly webinar style, but encourage you to really connect with each other, to have some conversations using the chat functions and Q&As. The chat functions is sort of the best place to offer insights or flag issues. Um, if you have any questions, you could also ask those in the panel. Later on, we'll try to incorporate those into the panel. And for those of you that already submitted questions in the RSVP, thank you for doing so. Just to remind you that this event is being recorded and that you could please mute your telephone to make it easier. I think we're now at about 170 plus individuals online. What we have here, bringing together some of the greatest stakeholders, in essence, supporters of Feed the Future, from not just NGOs, but Congress, the private sector, US universities, research institutions, and agencies across the US government. And together over the last decade, and it's hard to believe it's been that long, we have worked to build a coalition to end global hunger and to strengthen Feed the Future, and doing what we can to make it into the program that is today, sometimes inside and sometimes from afar. And I'm personally really excited to be able to work with each of you and to continue this coalition for the next decade as we try to deepen the sort of critical impact of this program. For those of you that don't know Interaction, we're the largest sort of coalition of US-based NGOs in the development and humanitarian space with programs around the globe. Food security is highly relevant to us. In fact, about 80% of our members implement or advocate for food security programs. And we've been involved as a community in the conceptualization, the design, the implementation, ultimately in the authorization of Feed the Future from the start. We continue to partner with USAID and the new Bureau of Resilience, and we'll do what we can to strengthen Feed the Future and expand it. And today's program and collaboration with USAID is a good example. Now, we all know the impact of this program. We've seen its impressive statistics as 23.4 million people now live out of the poverty line thanks to its programs. Some 5.2 million families no longer suffer from hunger, and 3.4 million children live free from stunting. But I think this broader creation of Feed the Future built on a long-standing US government investment and commitment to food security and nutrition issues. And it's a cooperation across agencies, stakeholders, and increasingly interconnected issues like WASH, climate, gender, nutrition have all been critical in sort of achieving these broad results. You know, as NGOs, we know that food and quality food is at the heart of human development. It impacts everything that we care about. It's about a child's growth and their cognitive ability. It's a family's health and a livelihood and safety. And it's ultimately also about a community's economic development and security. You know, unfortunately, this issue of hunger, the world still needs us in food security and nutrition assistance. And after decades of decline, in 2014, for the first time, we saw an uptick in global hunger. And some 2 billion people still are experiencing some form of moderate or severe economic food insecurity. And then we have this overlay of COVID that we're all living through. We've been working with our members to get a better understanding and bring attention to the realities of a COVID world and its impact on food securities. And immediately we think of health, but the biggest impact beyond health is one of food insecurity, of programs disrupted. But increasingly, COVID provides, basically a fundamental threat to the ability of some families to feed themselves and to provide for themselves. We may see by the end of a year a rise of some 270 million people moving into some form of hunger. And, so after a year of years of progress, we are in less than a year seeing decades of work being erased. And this loss is really tragic. It is, but ultimately it reaffirms the importance of programs like Feed the Future. It makes the networks, the experience, and the capacity that we have to rebuild and build and deal with this pandemic. I believe America is uniquely positioned to lessen the devastating impact of COVID in the area of hunger. And I think we need to empower Feed the Future to develop a more agile, inventive, and resilient programming. And it's to take these ideas of learning as we look to the future and bring them into a reauthorization of the Global Food Security Act in 2023. All this effort has been a collective effort, and I pledge to work with you, and Interaction pledges to work with you to do what we can to build on the success of this program and move it forward, and particularly at this time of great need. So it's my pleasure now to make a transition and to introduce Senator Bob Casey, who was a leading Democrat co-sponsor of the Global Food Security Act in the Senate and a key supporter of Feed the Futures for a long period of time. He had this position, again, from Senate Agriculture, and he has had leadership in climate, nutrition, children issues, have all helped bolster what we see as the sort of broad coalition within Congress that is devoted to ensuring this program continues. Senator Casey is always focused on U.S. global food security to make sure that it's sustainable and effective. And Interaction has always been excited to work with him in essence, to help him and work with him in acknowledging the accomplishments of the Feed the Future program. Unfortunately, Senator Casey is not able to join us virtually today, but we do have the opportunity to share his perspective in a brief video. So Sarah, if you could run the video, thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania. I want to congratulate Interaction Food Security, Nutrition, and Agriculture Working Group for hosting this event to kick off 2020 Feed the Future Week. It's hard to believe that USAID's Feed the Future program is already 10 years old, but in those 10 years, much has been accomplished. The Obama administration launched Feed the Future following the 2007-2008 global food crises. This initiative brought together the private sector, the global science and research community, donors, partner country governments, civil society, and the United States agricultural expertise to end global poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. I'm grateful to have been brought to this issue by the late anti-poverty champion, Senator Dick Lugar of Indiana. And also I'm grateful to have worked with Senator Johans of Nebraska, and then ultimately Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia to pass, at long last, the Global Food Security Act, which codified the Feed the Future program. I'm also excited to share that this week, I, along with United States Representative Betty McCollum of Minnesota, will be introducing a resolution marking the 10-year anniversary of Feed the Future and highlighting its many accomplishments. We know that since its inception, Feed the Future has helped more than 23.4 million people lift themselves out of poverty. It's prevented 3.4 million children from being stunted, and it ensured that 5.2 million families no longer suffer from hunger. This progress is remarkable, but much remains to be done, particularly in light of the devastating impact COVID-19 has had on our global food systems and food security itself. Preliminary assessments predict that severe hunger around the world will double from 135 million to 265 million, and that child wasting will increase from 47 million to 52 million by the end of this year because of COVID-19. While these numbers are bleak, I have confidence that Feed the Future and its many partners who are part of today's event will lessen COVID-19's impact and lay the groundwork for a hunger-free future. In the months and years ahead, I look forward to continuing to work with all of you and to continue to work with the USAID and bipartisan partners in Congress to strengthen Feed the Future by doing the following. Number one, ensuring Feed the Future programming adapts to the very real threat of climate change, which will have the greatest impact on the vulnerable populations which we all seek to help. Number two, strengthening global food systems from top to bottom. Number three, expand Feed the Future target countries to include fragile contexts. Number four, continue agricultural research partnerships with U.S. land-grant universities and multilateral institutions, particularly to combat invasive pests like desert locusts. And finally, number five, to continue advancing women's participation in agricultural systems. So I want to congratulate you again on your accomplishments and the very real impact that you've had on children and families around the world. Thank you for your continued efforts to end global poverty, and God bless your work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and hopefully that gave you a good introduction from Senator Casey. And it's really now one big strength of Feed the Future has been the ability of the program to attract really good leadership within the U.S. government. And it's my pleasure to introduce, I guess I didn't realize you were Dr. Jim Barnhart, who is the new assistant to the administrator of USAID for the new Bureau of Resilience and Food Security, and is the deputy coordinator of Feed the Future. And Jim has a long history at AID with deep experience, serving most recently as the mission director of, I guess, AID's largest mission in Jordan. And prior to that, spending time at USAID and the Bureau for Food Security's Research and Policy Division, and then other time as mission directors in Albania, Lebanon, in a career that spans from Pakistan to Zambia to Jordan, including sometimes starting off in an NGO working in Egypt and West Bank, Gaza, and programs there. Again, he holds a PhD in economics and a long history. Yeah, I had an opportunity to talk with Jim last month, and I think one of the things we have here is the ability of a seasoned Foreign Service officer with deep experience, understanding of how to drive and shape programs. And I really look forward to working with Jim as he works with his team in shaping the next decade of Feed the Future. So Jim, over to you, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Sam, thank you very much. Wow, that was quite the introduction. Between Senator Casey's wonderful video and your introduction, I'm a bit at a loss of words. They were very reaffirming to what we all aspire to, and give me great confidence going forward, despite all of the challenges we face. I have just a very brief presentation that we can roll through while I speak for just a few minutes. For all of you on the call, it's only 4 slides, I think, so don't worry, it's not going to overwhelm you with data and verbiage, but it would be nice to put that up. Let's see, that might be the last slide. Let's see, let's go back to the beginning. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so it is. It's exciting to be with all of you today as we launch Feed the Future Week. I mean, it is a time when we celebrate all things Feed the Future. And of course, I was able to participate in the Feed the Future Week when I was the Deputy Assistant Administrator in 2014, and we did that on Capitol Hill with members and staff, and it was a great event, but we weren't able to get the numbers that we can get here on virtually. So the advantage to being virtual is I think we have well over 150, closer, maybe over 200 at this point, folks who've joined us virtually. So I think that the wonderful thing about rejoining RFS is appreciating the bipartisan support from Congress and the collective effort that around our Global Food Security Act, which has made sustained momentum and progress possible these past years. So I want to do a particular shout out to our members and our staff from the Hill that have joined us today. Sarah, can I go to the next slide? All right. So as everyone on this call knows very well, Feed the Future did begin 10 years ago, and as a response to the global food crisis in 07 and 08. It was a call out and an awakening for our community that we needed to do something different. Business as usual just wasn't enough. We truly were not going to be able to address global hunger in our lifetimes without a drastic change to how we thought about and took action on this interconnected, complex, and dynamic issue. So we created a development model that would drive sustainable, systemic, and transformational change. And although, and through these past 10 years, we've stayed true to our founding principles, which can best be summarized as partnership and innovation. I believe government has a really important role to play in bringing new and sometimes even unexpected partnerships together under the shared vision of ending hunger and poverty. Through broad partnership across the various U.S. government agencies, the private sector, the NGO sector, especially under the leadership of Interaction, and academia, we're working on complicated challenges by leveraging the best of each and every one of us. So seeing you virtually here today is a testament to the wonderful network that we've been able to build over this past decade. The second pillar, innovation. Research in agriculture remains one of the most effective investments for reducing poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. Our Feed the Future innovation labs and other research partnerships are developing innovation critical to the protection and growth of food systems. And because threats to crops, such as pests and diseases, do not respect borders, these investments also protect our farmers and ranchers here at home. All right, Sarah, we can go to the next slide. So underlying these core approaches are values that still remain as true as they did 10 years ago. Top of our minds are agriculture-led economic growth. This remains the foundations for Feed the Future's programs. As you know, for developing countries, agriculture is the engine that drives economies, and it's still the best way to lift communities out of poverty and hunger, if in the long term, as well as improve nutrition. Next, central to our vision of hunger, to a hunger-free world, is unlocking the potential of traditionally overlooked groups and people, such as women, smallholder farmers, and small business owners. Lastly, there's resilience, or put simply, being able to bounce back after a fall or preventing a fall altogether. It's key for helping communities become more self-sufficient and more effectively coping with crises, both during the current pandemic and beyond. Our success is measured not on the progress achieved today, but how long it is sustained and whether it can ultimately lead to transformation. So driven by these principles throughout the past decade, Feed the Future has responded to a multitude of devastating shocks and stresses, including the drought crises in the Horn of Africa, the Ebola outbreak, and the fall armyworm crisis. While every crisis has its own unique set of challenges, Feed the Future has been able to apply these lessons and respond quickly and more efficiently each time. All right, Sarah, next slide. So this leads me to the COVID-19 and its potential devastating impact on poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. You don't need me to tell you how important it is that we act now to mitigate medium and long-term impacts. And as we look at all the progress we've made, I'm also reminded that we risk losing years of development gains if we do not act quickly and strategically right now. Fortunately, we are not starting from zero. Feed the Future is building on a decade's worth of progress and pivoting to best serve the unique challenges posed by COVID-19. And even in these precarious times, progress does remain possible. You may have picked up on this point of optimism in our theme for Feed the Future Week this year, which is cultivating hope. The truth of the matter is that current projections for global hunger paint a pretty grim picture. But it's also true that we have vast amounts of collective expertise and experience in responding to food crises in the past, including the everyday crisis of chronic hunger and malnutrition. We can and we will leverage and scale those solutions to meet the needs of communities where we are already working. And as we look ahead to the next decade of Feed the Future, it's important that we take stock of what's worked and where we can shift so that we can continuously maximize impact and build resilience and self-reliance. And as I had the fortune of stepping into the role during this critical milestone and to be cultivating the great work that's been done in the past, I want to thank all of you. I particularly want to single out and thank Beth Dunford for her leadership of Feed the Future for these past 5 years. And thanks to all of you. The challenges ahead to us are great, but I'm confident that with a proven model, a willingness to learn and adapt, and this vast network of partners and supporters, we can still end hunger in our lifetimes. Thank you. And back to you, Sam.
Turn it over to Asma to move into our panel.
Thank you very much. And it was really inspiring to hear from Senator Casey and Jim on this really important Feed the Future week. 10 years has flown by, and as Jim noted, a lot has been accomplished. And it's been, I have very fond memories of working with Kathy Spahn and Interaction members 10 years ago as we were helping shape Feed the Future, and as USAID and the US government team was really very consultative at that time. And so I have fond memories of pushing for especially the inclusion of nutrition, as the Lancet series had also just come out at that time, focusing on the critical impact of maternal and child malnutrition on countries' futures. So it's my pleasure, and thank you very much to Interaction for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'll start by introducing Kathy and Doug, and then we'll move into some questions. So Kathy Spahn is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Helen, Keller International, a global development organization working in 20 countries to save and improve the sight and lives of the world's vulnerable by combating the causes and consequences of blindness, poor health, and malnutrition. Kathy sits on a number of boards, including the Access to Nutrition Initiative and the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, and of course, Interactions Board. And she also serves on the International Food Policy Research Institute's Leadership Council Compact of 2025. Doug O'Brien is the President and CEO of NCBA CLUSA, where he works with the cooperative community, both domestically and internationally, to deepen its impact on individuals and communities. NCBA is the primary voice of cooperatives in the United States for using the cooperative business model to empower people in their businesses and communities. Before coming to NCBA CLUSA, Doug led the work of the White House Rural Council and served in top positions at the US Department of Agriculture. He's also served in the Congress and at the state level, and has held positions in academia. So with that, I'll start first with Kathy and Doug to get your perspectives on what makes Feed the Future impactful. What are some of the challenges that you see in helping in reaching its full potential? Kathy, I'll start with you, and then.
Well, I'll dive in then on both topics. And I think, you know, what really sets Feed the Future apart is there are so many donors out there who talk about integration. With Feed the Future, it's fully baked in, it's required. And that makes a huge difference because you're bringing together areas that common sense says should be together, but the way we all work is in separate professional silos, with nutrition over here, agriculture here, WASH people here, resilience, its own new subset. So it's great that they are brought together through Feed the Future. And we've been involved since the beginning, a very early project called Spring. And I want to talk a bit about that because our current Feed the Future project is one that we are doing with NCBA CLUSA, Kawalor, and I would imagine Doug would talk about that. Spring was based on 3 pathways: increased production of nutritious food, increased agricultural income, and empowering women. So the interventions were farmer nutrition schools to provide training on agriculture and poultry raising, community gardens, poultry rearing, providing linkages to markets, and of course, a very important gender component, all built around and anchored in training on nutrition and hygiene. The program had really impressive results, such as doubling the number of people who were engaged in the homestead food production, dramatic increases in dietary diversity, including doubling egg consumption, tripling the number of kids who met minimum dietary diversity thresholds. But I really want to bring it down to a story of one person, of many that I met in travels to Bangladesh to see the program. A young mom named Lily Biswan, whose husband was a local barber. They lived in Khulna in Bangladesh. He made $38 a month. They had 1 daughter. Finances were tight. $38 a month is not a lot to survive on. They spent $14 of that buying vegetables at market, so a pretty big chunk of their income. Never had eggs. So they joined the program, started a garden, raised chickens. They had a very small backyard, so they learned about trellising techniques so they could maximize their small space. They learned about building a ventilated poultry shed and separating chicks and separating hatching space. So by the time I got there, a year in, she was growing 7 varieties of vegetables. She had 2 chickens, she had a duck. She'd increased egg production, so they were eating eggs on a regular basis. She was sharing surplus produce with her neighbors. She was saving money because she wasn't spending $14 a month at market, and she was making money selling her eggs. Though, talk about the power of integration, her favorite part of the program, she said, was that she learned how to build a portable hand washing station, which many of you on this call know as a tippy tap. And she says now she's washing her hands a lot more, and so is her family. I think what's harder to convey, though, is yes, better nutrition, yes, income, but she was so positive and so self-confident. She said, my family is healthier, our life is improving every day. But what was the intangible that Feed the Future brought was hope. And you could just feel that emanating from her. So just very quickly, 3 probably basic challenges for now and in the future. The first one is the aid world and how we tend to work. And Jim has talked about this. We believe in coordination and integration, but in practice, each sector, WASH, agriculture, nutrition, finance, we have our own mandates, our own priorities, our own management styles, our own structures, our own timelines. So it takes a lot of upfront time to ensure we're all on the same page with shared priorities, kind of singing from the same hymn book, if you will. So when a donor such as Feed the Future pushes integration, requires it and pays for it, that's when good things happen. When donors don't, we all kind of fall back into our silos. I think the second challenge is much more of a pedestrian day-to-day challenge, and that's sequencing. And as we were chatting before this call, we were talking about a contractor that may show up in Jim's home in any minute. Any of you who've had a contractor renovate your home, you know you don't do it all at once. You have to sequence the painting, the wiring, the new windows, the light fixtures. It's the same thing in nutrition agriculture programs. Seeds being provided have to be timed with the planting season. And the list goes on, really basic things, but critical if a project is going to succeed. And I think the third challenge, the harder one to address, is that lasting improvements depend on larger changes in infrastructure and in policy that we don't have control of at the project level. Hygiene training only goes so far if households don't have access to water. You can't train women on gardens if they don't have access to land. And these shouldn't stop us, but we do have to remember there's a larger frame of reference that includes politics and policy. So I'll stop there. I'm sure Doug has a lot to add.
Thank you. Doug.
Thank you, Asma, and Kathy. Thank you, the team at Interaction. Jim, it's so good to be with Jim, I really appreciated your comments, and I think the theme of cultivating hope while it might be hard to see through some of the almost proverbial and real smoke these days. We have to keep our eyes on that future. And this approach with Feed the Future and the work in the last decade, I think has really proved that now this integrated approach is indeed more important in this moment than any other. We think about trying to respond to a particular crisis, and certainly COVID-19 is a generational one. We know that those communities and those actors who have resilience will be able to come back and to get to those, into that place for their family in those communities, so they have that security and stability. Once again, the only way that happens is if they have nutrition, they have wash, they have that agriculture-led economic development, and that's exactly what Feed the Future has been doing. So I'm just so glad to be part of this celebration. I want to talk about Keller a little bit, but first I'm going to talk about another project that we were part of, and one of the first on Feed the Future, and it was the Yajende project in Senegal. This one really focused on integrating a nutrition-led agriculture, so market systems as well as nutrition. And the outcomes were really, really astounding. We found that 31% reduction in the prevalence of acute malnutrition, 80% of households increased their diversification of their diets, 18% reduction in the prevalence of underweight children ages 6 months to 5 years. In the Yajende project, households saw income increase by 58% compared to the non-beneficiary households in similar communities. I mean, these are, it's not just one metric, but it's across a set of metrics that we know are really making a difference for those families. And that's the kind of things that I think really make a difference. I think Kathy put it so well on how easy it is to fall back into the silo. We all of us have our strategic plans, and whether those are brought kind of to us by external partners or our own type of vision and mission, and we start to look down, and every day that's what we're going for. Unless we have sort of that culture and those pressures to make sure that we work across these systems, it just doesn't happen. We know that from experience, and we know it does happen and can happen when those right motivations are put in place, like for Feed the Future. I just want to mention, a program that we are working on with HKI, and that is Keller. And I did double-sided here, so it's now I got it in front of me. This is a great program, also in Senegal, and it aligns with the government strategy to fight malnutrition, food insecurity, and poverty by empowering organizations and regional resource partners to scale up nutrition-led agriculture approach again. What we're looking at in the 5 years of Keller is working with 3,500 villages across 129 communities in 8 regions, touching 150,000 households with 500,000 children, 500,000 children. This approach, it trains and supports local institutions to lead their own community development to allow communities to sustainably increase consumption of nutritious and safe diets, and really work with the market systems and nutrition. And then another important pillar I didn't mention yet, and that's governance, making sure that those communities have the ability to enter into formal arrangements, to really understand commitments that they have, whether that's for nutrition market system or for conservation. And of course, I got to put just one little plug into cooperative principles. Of course, that's something that NCBA CLUSA brings. And that again is really empowering people in their business, in their community, to get some better outcomes in an integrated way.
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to hear both the story of an individual family and household, and then the progress across a set of metrics. So thank you for those. I want to turn to something that Senator Casey mentioned, wanting to see Feed the Future really move more in the direction of fragile contexts. And Jim, perhaps you could speak to this. Humanitarian situations are growing and becoming more entrenched around the world, and hunger is on the rise. How do you see Feed the Future supporting communities and countries in conflict or coming out of conflict? And how do you reach those most in need?
Great question, Asma. And it is one that challenges us every day, right? So, and I would say, again, having recently arrived at my post, one of the things that I've been very impressed with is, and now I'm going to switch a little bit into a bit of internal USAID discussion, but we have just pulled together what we could now call the R3 family of bureaus within aid that brings together humanitarian assistance, conflict prevention stabilization, and then RFS. With this very much idea, as you intimated, that we need to figure out how we take those divides, talk about integrative approaches, right, as Doug and Kathy talked about. This is a different way of looking at it in terms of areas of either fragility or areas of recurrent crisis or areas that are in the midst of a crisis. We have to start thinking about the systems underlying those countries and come at it from the very beginning and not wait till the humanitarian piece is finished or the conflict is maybe mitigated. We have to start from the very beginning. And so I take Senator Casey's challenge to heart, because I think that all of us within the Feed the Future family, certainly within the U.S. government interagency, across the board, we bring expertise, right? Whether it's the State Department's geographic diplomatic expertise and leadership that's critical. It's USDA's ability to think in terms of connecting with their agriculture colleagues in any given country. Peace Corps has an incredible presence around the world, and what we have to do is figure out how we take both our internal USG agency expertise and experience and bring that together as a broader U.S. government in a true integrated partnership. So I think that's how we're going to have to get at it. I think he's right, and I think if we don't think about it in that regard, then we will just have to come back again and again with major humanitarian assistance to try to help people get through the immediate crisis, as opposed to putting, what is our assessment show that $1 put toward the types of programs that Kathy and Doug just described saves us $3 of future humanitarian assistance funds, right? So that's what we have to try to figure out. And I think if we do assessments on the root causes of internal and cross-border conflict around the world, you come down often to issues of water access and resources, access to food, and inequality and poverty, right? The very kinds of things that we're trying to address in a systemic fashion. So we definitely have to bring that all together. I don't know if that answers your question, but it was an interesting one, and I hope I got most of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the issue of focusing on prevention, the increases in hunger over the last 6 years, as Sam mentioned, have been largely due to fragile contexts. And so, how do we prevent conflict? How do we prevent crises from leading into an increase in hunger and famine? And food security, nutrition are all partly the reasons for those crises. So,
in fact, I'm sorry, Asma, I just have to say, having spent most of my career in the Middle East, there is very strong evidence that the Arab Spring of 2011 that caused and continues to cause massive political economic transformation across that region began with a fruit vendor in Tunisia who was facing high taxes when it was unable to make ends meet, and that then tapped into an unmet demand of populations across the Middle East for that kind of access to both income and basic needs. So yes, I think there's a very strong argument to be made about that.
And with climate change, it's likely to, with droughts, and it's likely to exacerbate. Doug, Kathy, do you have any thoughts on this question?
I have a very brief one, and I think it's something we really cherish in our partnership with NCBA CLUSA, which is the work and respect for local partners, even in situations of conflict. That's our most effective tool. They predate us. They predate the conflict. They're going to be there after we're gone. And it's really listening to them and having that respect and mutual partnership with them that is key to when conflict finds us. We don't choose out areas that are in conflict, but conflict has a way of finding people. But Doug, please amplify.
No, I think that's such an important point, Kathy. I'll make maybe a slightly different point, that when we think about in that time of crises or conflict comes, it gets very real for those households. Are they in a position where they are selling their, the key assets that support and would be able to grow that household or that community just to survive at that moment, or can they at least sustain? And what Feed the Future and programs like that do is they give them that resilience, so they're able to last longer, so they can get to the other side. Maybe they can get through a drought. Maybe they can get through, and so we don't see the devastating numbers, that might otherwise be there. So that's, I think, a key point. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and it's the saying we talk about is you don't eat your seed corn. And if you're in such a crisis mode that you're using your seed essentially, then the chances for a bounce back are that much less.
I'll turn to the current crisis that we're in, the COVID-19 crisis, which has clearly demonstrated the fragility of our food systems and upended food production and access, and threatens to really reverse the gains that we've seen on hunger and malnutrition. How has the COVID crisis affected your programs, Kathy and Doug? And how are your colleagues in the field adapting?
Why don't I let you go first this time, Doug?
Okay, Kathy. So certainly it has presented significant challenges. Most importantly to the people in the communities. Their ability to interact and do work in community has been certainly challenged at times. There's been supply chain issues, whether that's in agriculture or otherwise. It can be really devastating for a seasonal plan that they had for a particular crop. So there's some real challenges. On the other side, I think we've seen that the approaches through Feed the Future have provided some of that resilience that we've been talking about. So one of the strategies that we use in a number of the Feed the Future programs that we're working on is called a community-based solutions provider. And essentially, that's maybe a one person, maybe it's a family entrepreneurial shop that, and we support them in building out that network. We might think of it here in the United States as almost like a franchise or a set of cooperatives, actually. And now typically what they're going to do is do, some, they might do seeds or other inputs. They might do custom field work. In this case, in the face of COVID, we had a set of entrepreneurs that were ready to move to get sanitation equipment, to be able to actually even move the messages out on community health. So while there's, some very significant challenges, I think, the networks that Feed the Future has been able to build has really paid off at this moment too.
And I would build on that with Kawalora, because as Doug said, we had the people and the know-how already on the ground, so we were able to pivot. So one of our roles in the project in Senegal was to set up women's groups who manufactured locally nutritious food blends to treat children with malnutrition. Well, with COVID's huge impact on income and therefore on food security, we converted the program to providing nutritious food supplements to the entire population, focusing on parts of the country that had the greatest food insecurity, like the South near the border with Guinea. And because everything was in place, we could pivot at a fraction of the cost that I think a typical emergency response, the $1 to $3 would have cost. We also could take advantage of our presence in hundreds of communities to provide thousands of tap stands for safe hand washing. Water access has improved in Senegal over the past years. And so the missing link was really the water tap itself. And because the government of Senegal had done such a great job communicating about the pandemic and what was needed to prevent its spread, there was demand for hand washing stations. So just like with the food supplements and with Doug's examples, we could count on the future's existing infrastructure to do this quickly and at a modest cost. And I would just add, similarly in our programs in Bangladesh and Nepal, we got to use our existing network and of course the wide cell phone ownership in these countries to pivot our communications to be about COVID and to use cell phones so we could reach millions of people really quickly, but also very inexpensively, and to do it in an interactive way. So it's not just that we were talking at people with messages, but responding to questions. And just one interesting fact is the #1 question in Nepal through 10,000 daily contacts with households was about breastfeeding. Should I breastfeed my child during COVID? Is this safe? So, you know, bottom line, Feed the Future with the integrated approach has really been the best platform, I think, not just to support COVID response, but to get to Jim's point, to help in the building back. So, you know, bravo to Feed the Future.
Jim, I had the pleasure of listening to or watching the BIFAD webinar earlier, and got to hear a little bit about some of the adaptations from that USAID's been undertaking. But would you speak to some of the guidance you've been giving missions and your partners?
Well, Senator Casey mentioned this too as well, and and I would say that fundamentally what we've been trying to do in working with our colleagues in the field, both at the missions and our implementing partners, is we were basically testing the ability of our programming to be nimble, agile, and responsive to the changing environment. None of us could have foreseen what what happened in March around the world. And I think that many people on this call, particularly folks who are implementers, would have been surprised if we had said in February that our programming around the world in the Feed the Future countries and Feed the Future implementing partners would have been able to pivot as quickly and as effectively as they have. And Kathy and Doug just mentioned a couple of examples which were inspiring, and there are others that I've heard as well. And so what we have tried to do from Washington is to make sure that we delegate as much as possible to the field in these situations that allow then the people who know the situation best, Senegal, Bangladesh, Nepal, each one of those are facing a different aspect of the crisis, right? And so there is no cookie cutter approach to this. And so we have to be willing to design programming that shifts the quick action decision making from us in Washington to the people in the field, in the missions, and within our implementing partners to make it as effective as possible. And I think as a stress test on that's been one of our theories from the beginning, the responsiveness of the post-COVID moment has proven the success of what we've been trying to do. Now, are we perfect? No. I am sure that of the 200 plus people on this call, I'm sure at least a dozen could come back to us and said, no, we wanted to do this, but they told us it was not going to work quite like that, right? So we have to continue strengthening that. We have to continue having a dialogue with our implementers, with our aid missions in the field to talk about how we can be more responsive and more and delegating more of that key decision-making direction to the people who know best.
Thank you.
And if I could, Asma, if I could, I'll just say, Jim, we have here at NCBA, CLUSA, and Keller, we've recognized that flexibility, and we really appreciate it. That partnership on the ground is important always. It is never more important than a time of crisis. So so just thank you for that approach.
This is sort of, I suppose that we'll be in this post-COVID moment for the foreseeable future. But, you know, Senator Casey alluded to a number of directions in which he'd like to see Feed the Future go. Kathy and Doug also spoke to some important challenges. You know, as we think about the next 10 years of Feed the Future and building back better after this or through this crisis, what are some of the key areas, Jim, that you'd like to really focus on initially? And then I'll turn to Kathy and Doug for your thoughts on.
Yes, what a great moment to take a pause, even in the midst of a crisis, but still 10 years on, we take a breath, we look around at what we've learned, and we figure out what we can do going forward that improves an already proven model, but takes us even faster in acceleration toward that journey to self-reliance. So I would say certainly number one, we need to be elevating resilience as a priority aspect to all of our programs. So it's going to mean continuing to reiterate the importance of focusing on resilient food systems. And by systems, you know, we're stepping beyond the value chain, right? A food system involves everything from the environment, it involves nutrition aspects, it involves access to clean water, right? And so the system we cannot lose focus on that. And certainly the Global Food Security Act has elevated the focus on resilience, but we need to continue elevating it so we don't lose momentum. We are within USAID doing a moment of thinking about how the agency responds several years, or 6 months, 1 year, 2 years out post-COVID. And so we recognize that looking at systems across the board means taking a look at all of the areas where we're operating right now and seeing where there are people either falling across that poverty line, falling into malnutrition, falling into hunger, and figuring out how we can start addressing those systemic issues. So, and resilience becomes then the undergirding principle for how we look at these systems. We have to look at synergies across sectors, right? These crises are not isolated events. They're interconnected, and as a result of a convergence of shocks and stresses. And we know that the sources of resilience in the face of such challenges cut across and even transcend sectors. So we have to collaborate with each other. I was on a call yesterday with a lot of Interaction members at a senior technical level, and I took a moment to want to encourage them to try to figure out how they could also step outside of if they're focused on water and sanitation, for instance. So how can they work with some of their partners who are looking at nutrition or looking at agriculture? We need to model both within the interagency, within aid, and then that kind of cross-sector synergy. And so that would definitely be a priority for Feed the Future going forward, is how we continue to strengthen. We've already gone a good distance down the road on this, but there's far more that we can do. And I believe that the COVID crisis highlights this essence of being able of going across sectors, and also starting earlier with the starting earlier with the resilience and systems approach during a humanitarian crisis, and not waiting. We need to start right now on those issues. One final thought, Asma. Last week there was the week for the African Green Revolution Forum, and I had the honor to participate in a ministerial gathering during the week. And there were a number of speakers who made the point that reiterating the famous statement attributed to Winston Churchill was, "Let's not let this crisis go to waste." And what they meant by that in this context was, let's think through the policy and the regulatory and maybe even institutional gaps that are holding us back on the resilience agenda, on water, sanitation, and hygiene, and on nutrition and food security, And let's address those now. Let's get governments to think through, our host governments, what they can do from a policy, legal, regulatory, institutional framework to change. And because usually in these moments, we can move a lot faster in terms of getting governments shifting, right? Nothing like a crisis to spur us on. So I would encourage those of you that are out in the field that are looking and seeing something that you've been thinking, oh, we've been trying to get attention on this issue related to nutrition, or this issue related on food security. Let's address it now, and we will work together with our partners, with our host governments, to do what we can from the U.S. government to take advantage of instituting this policy regulatory change that has always needed to happen, but we might actually have some traction at the moment. I'll pause. I've spoken too long.
Not too ambitious there. I mean, I would really things. Jim, you talked about the need to work across sectors, and we've talked about WASH, agriculture, nutrition. Let's not forget the health sector. The health sector is being devastated by COVID. People aren't showing up for services because they're afraid. Services are taxed beyond what's credible. We really need to shore up maternal and child health services. You talked about a systems approach. Completely agree. We have to look at the whole food system. And I think, you know, my 2 cents is Feed the Future moving forward has to have a greater and greater emphasis on markets, because the reality is more and more people in the world are going to eat the way we do in the United States, from food we're buying with money we get from work, rather than eating just what we're producing. So markets are going to be a big piece of the picture. So we need to increase access to markets, advocate and support food processing that's healthy, and support markets to produce and sell more nutritious foods. And the third piece, which Senator Casey referenced, when you talk about resilience, of course, is climate change. Planting schedules, pests, right? You talked about pests and how they cross borders. We need crops that can adapt to higher temperatures. So we're going to need a lot of solutions, whether it's through crop diversity and biodiversity, resistant plant varieties, conservation techniques to protect soil, smarter use of water, smarter use of fertilizers. There are experts who know more than I do, but climate change has to be in there if you're building resilience.
And I don't have a whole lot. I just have to agree with both Jim and Kathy, but I'll maybe put a slightly different twist to it, and then add one more thing, and that is around resilience. I couldn't agree more, Jim, that this is a forced sort of experiment for all of us in the community on learning how these types of systems and infrastructure respond to a crisis. And there's a lot to learn. And there's also, as Jim said, there's the motivation to change things maybe more quickly than we usually do with kind of the bureaucracies that we have. We need to take advantage of that. So I absolutely think that's the case. And I will pull out on resilience, and it's building on what Kathy said, but it is maybe a bit of a 90-degree, and that is, in resilience, there is this, and I think it's really laid bare right now, this tension between local systems, and if those are working, they are, highly resilient, and systems that are integrated, regionally, nationally, internationally, and if there's problems with supply chain, et cetera, what does that mean for resilience? We don't have to, be theoretical about it at this moment. We saw things happen, and I absolutely agree with Kathy that we need to continue to really focus on market systems as people climb the income ladder. But at the same time, I think our notions of resilience should be refined, and we should be a lot smarter about it in the next, in these next months and years. And the last thing I'd say is sort of in that same vein of don't forget about health, don't forget about governance, don't forget about that capacity building for the people in the institutions on the ground. And I know it's almost so baked into what we do, but I think in a moment like this, we have to think that's how things are going to get done, that are going to be consistent with the vision of the people on the ground, which of course is something that we all think is terrifically important.
Hey, Asma, this is Jim. Could I comment real quickly? Because Kathy and Doug just made a really important point that I want to table thump, if possible.
Please.
Great. The market systems, could not agree with you more. I think all of us on this call recognize that as important as our assistance is in us working with our international partners who are supporting these countries, they pale in comparison of the potential funding that could be coming in through domestic, regional, and international investors in the private sector. And so certainly moving forward, one of the things that we're going to have to get better at is engaging with the private sector, looking for ways that we can work together with our shared interests. And I'm talking local private sector, continental or regional, and international. We should all be figuring out how we can work together on this, because those kinds of entities are always thinking about the future. They're always looking for sustainability in what they do by the very nature of existence. And we should be tapping that to a much greater extent. We've done a pretty good job at it. I give us probably a B-, maybe. Given what I know, I think we should be shooting for far more in terms of those types of engagements. And the market systems and the private sector leadership in that respect is really important. So I'll pause there.
You've got a lot of work ahead of you.
Well, you must have read my next question, because it was going to be about the private sector, so that was good. There is a question in the chat box about the role of food systems in global greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So as you look at the next phase of, or the next 10 years of Feed the Future, what role does Feed the Future have in encouraging that shift? And Jim, maybe start with you. Yeah.
Sure. I think that this goes back to the earlier point that I was making on innovation and working with our innovation labs through Feed the Future. It's one of the aspects of the program that's really exciting, right? We have 19 or 20 innovation labs right now with universities around the country and around the United States, with partners and international partners and universities across the globe, addressing these kinds of issues, right? And it is both, whether it's climate change related kind of question or other innovations that we can use the expertise of our academic communities to then apply and scale rapidly in the field. And so I think we're going to have to constantly be looking at those types of innovations when we're looking at issues of whether it's carbon or other kinds of climate-related problems facing us. The other issue would be, this is a lesson learned, I think, from the current crisis, which is the power and effectiveness of the digital approaches to problems, right? I mean, look at us right now, right? We are continuing our work. We're having this Feed the Future Week virtually, and I think that a lot of those kinds of ways of trying to move around and to persevere through a crisis like the current one we have is showing ideas of, whether it's digital payments, whether it's remote sensing. We can use this technology that as it currently exists to try to mitigate quite a bit of these things that are setting us back. Again, whether it's carbon emissions. I mean, my hunch is that the last 6 months, given the fact that we haven't been doing our our travel overseas, we haven't been, we've seen a diminution of quite a bit of I would think greenhouse gases that will have had quite an effect. I have no idea. I am not tracking that, but I would guess that that's true. And I think we can continue to figure out how we can use technology to help mitigate those expenditures on the carbon footprint side.
Great, thank you. We have about 2 minutes left, so this is not a quick question, but both Kathy and Doug and Jim, you all talked about what COVID has revealed about the importance of capacity strengthening at the local, national level in host countries. As we look ahead to the next 10 years, and this has been a big part of the journey to self-reliance and the localization agenda, what are some of the key barriers to doing that well? And, what would you like to see, Kathy and Doug, in the next phase to really build that local and national capacity?
I'll be very quick and hand it to Kathy. I'll just mention two things, and this group knows well. I mean, while we need to be integrated, we do have to look to the fundamentals of nutrition and nutrition-led agriculture and education, particularly for girls and women. I think those are two things that we have to keep an eye on. I think for real progress over the next 10 years.
Thanks, Kathy.
I'd be brief as well, just building on that quickly, to be mindful that there are competing interests. There are nutritional foods versus those foods households can sell to generate income, and those usually win out. So keeping nutrition front and central, since it's essential to development, I think is key. The other thing that's really key in the next 10 years is access to land and access to water. And certainly climate change is going to be interwoven, but those are absolutely key. And as always, appreciate that Feed the Future allows us the upfront time to plan and to make sure we're all on the same page, that there is joint accountability, and to give us time to work on a local level and listen, because there's nothing worse in a project than saying, all right, here's your monitoring and evaluation framework, here's the financial report, you have to fill these out every month. So the fact that Feed the Future lets us switch that dynamic and build from the ground up, I think is really, really important. So hold on to that for the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you all very much for this rich discussion.
Thank you. And thanks, Jim, for listening to us all opining on what you should do.
I know this is exactly what partnership's all about. I love it. This is what a tremendous event, and I really appreciated hearing Kathy and Doug, your points, and great questions, Asma. Truly thought-provoking. I'm sorry I'm doing this, but taking just one more minute to again table thump what you both mentioned in terms of making sure as we move forward that our programs are as inclusive as possible for these populations that are either underserved, and it varies by country, so we have to be, again, flexible at the local level. But in so many of our countries, if we just improve the inclusiveness, and that's all we did, we could see transformative change, whether it's women owning businesses, women smallholder farmers, the disabled, or others that in again, every cultural and every country context, that those people that are marginalized or are not part of the discussion, just tapping that bit of potential would truly, would cultivate that hope that we're looking for.
Well, thank you, Jim and Kathy and Doug, and for all these insights on Feed the Future, and Asma for steering this conversation. To respond to this moment, we'll need the flexibility, the adaptation, the innovation, the inclusivity, the integration, the partnerships, and the systems to shape Feed the Future in a post-COVID world. And you've raised the bar as to how much we have ahead of us. I do want to thank again Senator Casey for his remarks and commitment to these issues, and he and his staff have been great partners in these efforts. I also want to thank former Senator Isaacson and Representatives Betty McCollum and Chris Smith, who have given continued leadership on the Global Food Security Act. And we will work with them and all champions in Congress to further strengthen and incorporate all the lessons learned that you heard in this great panel into Feed the Future programs. As a reminder, this is just the beginning of the Feed the Future Week. We hope that you'll join this conversation online, and that each of your organizations will share stories about Feed the Future and why you're committed to the program. This Wednesday, USAID is hosting a Feed the Future Week Twitter chat from 12 to 1 p.m. To participate, there are two hashtags, one hashtag cultivating hope, and the other one hashtag end hunger. It's a great opportunity to highlight your own organization, the role in Feed the Future, and the impact of your work and your programs, and the current need for investments in global food security. And perhaps here is really to end, this is ultimately about hope and shaping our common future, our common humanity, and to thank you all for joining this event and for submitting your questions. And we really look forward to continue this conversation. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you for all of you who joined us. And we look forward to having you again next time.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you guys at Interaction.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.